In 1938, a man, Carl Pruitt, came home from work, and he saw his wife with another man, and in a fit of rage he strangled his wife to death with a chain before killing himself. And not too long after Carl was buried, far away from his wife, people started to notice a strange discoloration on his tombstone. And this discoloration kind of looked like linked chains, and these chains eventually formed the shape of a cross. And one day a boy, trying to show off in front of his friends, threw a rock at Mr. Pruitt's grave, and he hit it so hard that the tombstone chipped. Then right after he did this boy died very strangely, as on his way home he hit a tree and his bicycle chain came off, and somehow his bicycle chain strangled him to death. And since this was a very odd way to die, many believe that Mr. Pruitt's ghost was to blame. Then about a month later, this boy's mother went to Mr. Pruitt's grave, and she hit the tombstone with an axe until it was destroyed, or so she said. And the next day, she also died very mysteriously as she was strangled to death by a clothesline. And when people went to go check out Mr. Pruitt's grave, or his tombstone, they saw that it was completely undamaged. There were no chips, no scratches, just no damage whatsoever. It still looked perfectly brand new, except for the strange discoloration. Then there was a guy in a wagon that was riding past a cemetery with his family one day, and he shot at the tombstone with his revolver, screaming that he wasn't afraid of no ghost. And the gunfire scared the horses, and this man fell off his wagon and ended up getting strangled to death by the reins that was tied to the horses. Now after these three very bizarre deaths, the townsfolk believed that Mr. Pruitt's grave was cursed, and the local congressman ordered 2 police officers to go investigate. And while they were taking pictures of the tombstone, one of the police officers laughed at the idea of this being a cursed grave, and as they were driving away they saw a very bright ball of light following them. So these officers, now very scared, started to floor it in hopes of losing this creepy ball of light that was following them, and they ended up crashing. And the officer that laughed at the idea of Mr. Pruitt's grave being cursed died. His head was almost completely decapitated. And after all these deaths, finally the townsfolk avoided Pruitt's grave. But there was still one man a couple years later who decided to go there to prove to everyone that there was no such thing as curses or killer ghost. And he went to the graveyard with a hammer and a chisel, and he started hacking away at the tombstone. And the sounds of chipped stone could be heard by all who lived close to the cemetery. And later that night, this man, Arthur Lewis, was found dead. He was somehow strangled to death by the chain that was used to lock the cemetery gate. And yet again, the tombstone showed no signs of any damage whatsoever. And after this death, they decided to move the cemetery, the bodies, the tombstones, to another location, except for Carl Pruitt. And it is believed that in 1958, Carl Pruitt's grave was finally destroyed by a strip mine operation. But some say that his grave and his tombstone still lay hidden to this very day in a secret location. Now this is a very well-known case, and it was made famous by Troy Taylor's book Beyond the Grave. And to be honest, I'm not sure how accurate these stories are because it did happen in the 1930s. But if these events are true, then something paranormal must have happened in eastern Kentucky in the 1930s. Now this is not the only case of a cursed grave. In fact, there are many others. And one of the most famous and well-documented cases happened in 1922 when King Tut's tomb was discovered after being undisturbed for more than 3,000 years. One of these mysterious deaths happened when a radiologist, Douglas Reed, did an x-ray of King Tut before the mummy was given to a museum. And the next day, he got sick and he died 3 days later. Then Richard Bethel, the second person to enter the tomb, started to experience mysterious fires within his house not too long after he came back from Egypt. And he did die under mysterious circumstances, as he was found dead at a gentleman's club by being choked to death in his sleep by smoke. And there were no reports of any fires that day or night at this location. Then there was the death of an excavator who hung himself about a year after he entered the tomb. He wrote in his own blood before he died that he had succumbed to a curse which forced him to disappear. Then there was George Herbert, the man who financed the excavation of King Tut. He died by blood poisoning that was caused by a mosquito bite, and they say that right after he died, all the lights in his house mysteriously turned off. Now, out of all the people that allegedly died by King Tut's curse, these 4 are the only ones that I found to be odd, as most of the others died many years later, and their deaths seem to be more natural, not paranormal. But many people do believe in not just the curse of King Tut, but the curse of the Pharaohs. Now I'm sure there are a lot of creepy cases that happened to grave robbers in our ancient past in Egypt that were never written down. But one of the first modern cases happened in the 1800s when a Polish traveler bought 2 mummies in Alexandria. And while he was traveling back home, he kept having terrifying visions of 2 ghosts. And when he was sailing back to his homeland, the visions started to get worse, and he and all the other passengers were constantly plagued by very bad weather while they were on the boat. And this man believed that these 2 mummies were to blame, so he threw them overboard. And not too long after he did this, the weather cleared up, and the visions he was having went away. Then there was another very similar account when an archaeologist was involved in removing 2 mummies from their tombs. And he too started to see their ghosts in his dreams, or nightmares I should say. And just like the previous guy, he was very scared by this, and it wasn't until he returned the child mummies with their father, who was resting at a local museum, did these visions finally stop. Then there was another case that happened when a very sick child stared in the eyes of a mummy of an ancient Egyptian king at a museum in Egypt. And this sick child didn't die or get cursed, but somehow he miraculously got healed. And many believe that this was a miracle. So not all ancient Egyptian mummies and artifacts are evil. Sometimes they can bring luck or heal the sick. Now there are just so many stories throughout the world of cursed graves and ghosts that have committed murder. So I'll probably make this into a series, and I will try to cover them all, or at least the ones that I find to be extremely interesting. Until next time, this is Paranormal Junkie. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.